With the dust all but settled in free agency, who are the Sharks' biggest winners and losers?
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, caretaker at the Reef, also the co-host of Locked On NHL. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Proudly part of the Locked On Network, we cover your team every day. And if you want to be an everydayer, all you have to do, just follow wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. And today we're going to be examining some of the winners and losers from the Sharks free agent moves, as right, any action that you take or don't take causes a ripple effect on the roster. So we're going to be looking at why Yaroslav Askarov is a massive winner after the Sharks offseason moves, and why the second line center is a big loser for the San Jose Sharks, among some other options here. So, but before we get to all that, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So, with every action or inaction that Mike Grier makes and decision he makes, right, there's going to have a ripple effect of what this means for other players on the roster. And with that, some people are maybe in a better spot than they were kind of heading into the offseason, and some people are maybe in a little bit more precarious spot heading into training camp. So I kind of wanted to look at some of the players who I thought kind of were big winners this offseason, despite not being on the ice doing anything right now. And I think you have to start with Yaroslav Askarov as a massive winner for the San Jose Sharks this offseason. And with Askarov, yes, I know people are going to be like, well, they just drafted Joshua Ravensburg, and the first round, they just spent a first round pick on Joshua Ravensburg. And how can Askarov be a winner with a potential replacement for him in the fray? I say, let's calm down. Ravensburg, who, again, you're probably not going to see be an impact player for San Jose for several years from now, right? And the hope is with Askarov that he plays well over these next two seasons, that he earns himself a fat contract and cements himself to be the San Jose Sharks long-term starter. Why I do think this offseason was a big win for Askarov is two reasons. One, I do think the defense is improved over what we saw, especially at the end of last year, right? Bringing in John Klingberg, who I know is injury prone, but feel like he has said it himself. He's feeling the best he's had in years. He's feeling healthy. He hasn't had to rehab this offseason. He can actually train for the offseason. And you're getting a guy who is very motivated to go out and prove it and try to get himself one last nice contract. You bring in Dimitri Orlov, who has, yes, maybe lost a little bit of a step with Carolina, and you saw that especially in the playoffs, but he is a massive improvement defensively over anything the Sharks had last year when it comes to just playing straight defense, and is going to be a huge improvement to their ability to get the puck from point A to point Z or B, right? Like, he is great at, digging into his analytics and digging into his stats. He's very good at getting the puck out of his zone and getting the transition going the other way. And Nick Leddy, who I think will be an improvement, and a guy, again, also entering the last year of his deal, was cut by the Blues and is healthy now, right? Is a guy who dealt with injuries and I don't think ever came back to being what you would expect with Nick Leddy. All three of these guys, especially Klingberg and Leddy, both those guys are in big kind of prove it type of situations. And Orlov, I think all three of these guys have a big opportunity to provide a much better defensive group than what we saw from the Sharks last year. And for Askarov, the second thing too that makes him, I think, a huge winner is the Sharks didn't go out and get like a competition. And I'm not saying Nedeljkovic is, Alexander Nedeljkovic isn't a good goalie. Like I think he can be a really good goalie, but they kept in mind, like, we want to get a good partner who can push Askarov, but be a good teammate. And even hearing from Nedeljkovic himself, like that is his role. He knows what his role is to kind of guide and steer Askarov through a first full season in the NHL. I think the Sharks have set Askarov up to really kind of have a big season and cement himself as a full-time NHL player, one, and two, an upper echelon goalie, especially with a hopefully improving roster. So I think for Askarov, with the moves that were made this offseason, it is clearly Askarov's team when it comes in at net. And again, like you spent a first round pick on Askarov last summer. You've been kind of, we're very patient with him this year, wanted him to play another full season in the AHL. We saw glimpses and flashes of him in the NHL be brilliant at times. And now, I think it's time for him to kind of to take that next step. And the Sharks, I think, have done a good job of putting him in a position to succeed and at least attacking the defensive group in front of him. And, that doesn't even include Shakir Mukhamadullin taking the next step. And if Sam Dickinson sticks around too, there is reason to believe that the defense can make some improvements this season. Speaking of the defense, right, with all the new additions, I think one person who's really hurt by this has to be Henry Thrun, who, of course, is also, kind of subject to trade rumors right now, right? You're looking at the defense right now. There's, 8 names, Orlov, Leddy, Klingberg, Ferraro, Liljegren, Desharnais, Thrun, Mukhamadullin, and that doesn't even include Sam Dickinson and Jack Thompson. Jack Thompson, who's an RFA right now, still waiting for his contract. And Sam Dickinson, who we know is going to get I think would have to have a miserable training camp and preseason to not get a chance to play NHL games, at least to start the season. I'm fully believe Thrun might be the guy left behind here with all the new additions, right? We spent some time earlier this week kind of talking about the big trade candidates between Ferraro, Liljegren, and Thrun. But, even if the Sharks do trade Ferraro or Liljegren to open up a spot, it does feel like Henry Thrun is going to be at the bottom of the pecking order here for the Sharks. Again, right, Mukhamadullin, who showed a lot before he got injured last year. Sam Dickinson, who's a 11th overall pick and had won an excellent season in juniors, and the Sharks have talked about how important Dickinson is to their future. They're going to put everything that they can to potentially succeed. And yes, I know Henry Thrun was a trade that Mike Grier made for, and was a third. The Sharks traded a third round pick for him, but we just haven't really kind of seen the growth that you would hope to and expect from Henry Thrun. And Thrun's been on this team the last 2 seasons, and we know how this defense has been the last 2 seasons. I'm not placing it all on the feet of Henry Thrun. But like at some point you have to kind of move on and give some other guys an opportunity. And I think for the Sharks and for Henry Thrun, he might unfortunately be the guy who kind of gets left out as new players and are added into the fray. So I think though defensively, like, Liljegren and Ferraro, 2 other guys you could maybe discuss, but they might potentially get traded here and with Thrun, we know his trade value isn't going to be too high. And if nobody's willing to kind of take him on, he might just become, the de facto 7th defenseman for the Sharks, not get a lot of playing time, or maybe he's subject to waivers and then playing in the AHL for the San Jose Barracuda, and kind of stuck kind of in between right now. So, Askarov, big winner. Henry Thrun, unfortunately, looks like a big loser from this offseason with all the new additions. So we're going to talk about the second line and kind of what it means for some players there, specifically the second line center and some of the young kids. So we'll get to that here in just 1 second. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility, control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. The great thing about it is, especially if you and your partner, you guys can have separate accounts, but also have that joint account that we guys are working towards your personal goals and also your shared goals. Maybe you're saving up for a car, saving up for that dream vacation or whatever it is. Monarch Money puts you in full control. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. All right, before we continue, of course, want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. If you haven't yet, perfect time to, even though it's the off season, right? Perfect time to subscribe wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well as we start to kind of dig through the rubble of the off season and start getting you ready for a new season of San Jose Sharks hockey. So again, make sure you're following along wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. All right. So I think a loser has to be the second line center. And we don't know who that's going to be. And that's going to be one of the big stories for training camp, whether it's Will Smith, who we know Mike Greer wants to at least give an opportunity to be a center right now. And we'll talk about some of the young players here in a minute. Or if it's Alex Wennberg, if he kind of holds down that spot. I think those are your two big candidates to be second line centers. But the Sharks, right, we know that they tried, at least reached out to some of the big names, and Brock Besser, who of course re-signed with the Canucks, and Nikolai Ehlers, who signed with Hurricanes, and some of maybe the top end forwards in this group. The Sharks tried to at least go out and get a top six forward to pair with whoever, to at least give another option there, and just kind of struck out. And I think Philip Kurashev has is probably going to be on your second line by default, and you might have some other guys here like Adam Gaudette or whomever kind of in the fray as well. But you feel like it's going to be probably Eklund, Celebrini, Toffoli as your top line, or maybe it's if Will Smith doesn't win the job, maybe Smith is on that first line there. But there's not a lot of juice on that second line right now, right? And it feels like it's going to be It's going to be Wennberg, Smith, Kurashev, or something like that right now, which doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. And maybe you split up, right, the Eklund, Celebrini, Toffoli line. Maybe you break up the 70s line and try to kind of balance things out of here a little bit, which is an option the Sharks do have. But it's still like it feels like you have 5 top 6 forwards, and you're kind of missing that one guy. And I do feel bad for that second line center because, again, like Celebrini is kind of set up with success, and no matter how they mix and match it, even if maybe they run an Eklund, Celebrini, Smith line or whatever they do, but it just feels like that second line center, you're missing a dude on that line, unfortunately. But winners out of this is the young players, right? Specifically, I think you point to 3 guys in the system who have a chance to potentially crack the Sharks opening night roster. Michael Misa, who we talked about yesterday. We did the whole deep dive on Misa. Igor Chernyshov, and Quentin Musty. And you look at, because the Sharks' inability to go land a legitimate top six winger this offseason, the door is wide open for one of these, especially one of these three players, to go out and win a job opening night. Winning a job opening night and keeping the job, two different things, as you can point to Daniel Gushin last year, right, who won an opening night roster and lasted about 10 games in the NHL before he spent the rest of the year in the AHL, or majority of the season in the AHL, with the Barracuda. So again, we're still in the kind of, just projecting and trying to figure things out here. But you do feel like, if I had to kind of rank them, I think Misa has got the clearest path, right? And yes, I know he's the rawest of the, not the rawest, but he's the youngest and least experienced of the players. But of course, right, he has a draft pedigree as a second overall pick. We talked about yesterday just how clean of a prospect he is, and his ability, I think, to fit in and play NHL games right now. And even if you took the Will Smith approach of being very cautious with him the first, half of the season, like, he's still going to get plenty of opportunities to play big time minutes on the second line and play on the power play and do all those things as you kind of get him ready and get him geared up for the rest of the second half of the season and, and beyond. But I think for him, like, he would right now, I think, be the number one slot there. And then Igor Chernyshov, who looked amazing with the Barracuda last year, even better playing with Michael Misa with Saginaw in the OHL. And as a guy who has played professional hockey, against grown men as a 17, 18-year-old in the KHL, and a guy who does have those hard skills combined with those soft skills, like, you could see him easily come into training camp and just be better than everyone else, and like win a job or outright opening night. And I think he's a guy where, I think one of the nice things about Chernyshov is his flexibility, where if you want to put him on the third line and let him play a little bit lesser role, he's shown in the KHL, and yes, the KHL and NHL are different, but he has shown that he's been able to produce and play that kind of tough skill, kind of hard-nosed type of game over there. Or if you want to let him play on the top, play top 6 minutes, he has enough skill, and he has he's got a big boy body already at 6'2", 200 pounds already. Like, he's a guy who I think can fit into many different roles and kind of do whatever you need there. But and even Quentin Musty, right? I made the case for Quentin Musty, who I think should spend the season playing in the AHL to kind of continue his game and to continue his development, just because for him, Quentin Musty is like, he's a very special skilled player, but just maybe his game isn't as rounded, as polished as the other two guys. And I think spending some time in the AHL, just like what we saw with William Eklund, right? Spending an entire year in the AHL was much better for it, right? Quentin Musty, if he spends the season or a good chunk of the season in the AHL, kind of rounding out his game, I do think he is going to be better for it. But would you be completely shocked if Musty came into camp and just looked awesome? And he looked very good. And again, I know prospect scrimmage, you don't want to overact, but he legitimately looked like one of the best forwards out there. Him and Chernyshov, I think you could argue, looked like two of the best forwards out there. At least in that scenario, and Musty is a guy who the Sharks do think very highly of, right, and what they kind of expect for him. So you can also throw Cam Lund in here as well, who played with the Sharks last year, but I do think he is very much on the Colin Graff path to success of just start the season in the AHL. Like, you got a taste of the NHL last year, start the season in the AHL, marinate for a little bit, and then we'll pull you up, and you're gonna have a good second half of the season. So there's plenty of jobs and opportunities, despite some of the moves that the Sharks made this offseason. They didn't really solidify that second, or I guess that third person on the second line here for them. And I do think like that's going to be one of the most intriguing options and battles going into training camp, and see who can take a job there. So we're going to finish up by looking at the bottom six and kind of some of the winners and losers from there. So we'll get to that in just 1 second. All right, before we finish up, do of course want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NHL podcast. There's no off season. We're bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, the bottom six, and I just kind of clumping a lot of these guys in here. I will say a big winner for me for the bottom six here. A couple winners here, I think, though. One big one is Colin Graf, right? And Graf could be a guy who you look at as a potential top six guy, but I think Graf is most likely suited to play on that third line. And yes, I know there's still questions about who's going to be the third line center, and if it's Wenberg or if it's whomever else. But I do think maybe it's a guy like Kurashev, or maybe it's a guy like Adam Gaudette. I do think this third line is going to be much better. At least that's the hope, because of a guy like Colin Graf, right? And I think Colin Graf is a very good player, and I think he's quickly earned the trust of the coaching staff, right? As a guy who's excelled on the penalty kill last year, despite never playing penalty kill before in his life. He's a guy who we saw the scoring touch start to show up at the end of the season. And I think Colin Graf is going to be set up to have a nice season because of, again, I just think, especially at the end of the season after the Granlund trade, that third line center was a big question mark for the Sharks. And I think they're in a little bit better spot right now, whether it's, Gaudette or whether it's Wenberg. Like your hope is Alex Smith. Alex Smith wins the second line center. Will Smith wins the second line center position, right? And Wenberg becomes your third line center. And then you have a really nice kind of down the middle trio here. And then Wenberg playing with better wingers like a Colin Graf and whomever else they get. Like that's the hope here. So another quick winner. Because of some of the moves, I do think Ty Dellandrea is set up to have a really nice kind of secured his role. Like, he was a guy who played center for the Sharks, kind of that fourth line center for them last year. And yes, again, I think Gaudette's in the mix here, but I think Dellandrea is a guy who probably feels really, really safe about his position and where he is at in the roster. One guy who probably does not feel great about his position, especially with the additions, has to be Carl Grundstrom. Right, Grundstrom was in and out of the lineup a lot last year. I know he dealt with some injuries, but he was a healthy scratch at a time. And you look again, right? Barclay Goodrow's not coming out of the lineup, but despite some of the pleas from Sharks fans, like, he's a guy who's just going to be in the lineup every night. You feel with Dellandrea and his ability to play center wing, play some penalty kill. Adam Gaudette, like, as a kind of a speedy scoring guy who can, again, play center and wing. Just the flexibility that all those guys have. And then Colin Graf, who we just mentioned, like, kind of stapling himself as a potential third liner here. It probably does not spell well for Grundstrom to be playing a lot here. And that doesn't include if guys like Chernyshov or Ethan Cardwell or Zach Ostapcha or Igor Afanasiev, if any of these guys can even pop onto the roster as well. Grundstrom probably feels like he's going to have a big time training camp this offseason, training camp, to kind of really secure his spot. And as a guy who really didn't play a lot on special teams and mostly was kind of a 5-on-5 type of guy, Grundstrom probably does feel like his spot is tenuous at best, I would say, right? And for to, kind of be an everyday type of player. And, maybe the Sharks could potentially, waive him and try to bury him in the AHL for a little bit. They'd have a little bit of a cap hit. If he was, not that really matters, but or maybe they just ship him off to, another team who's trying to kind of upgrade or add another body to their bottom six here. But if you're struggling to make the roster of the San Jose Sharks and be an every night player for the San Jose Sharks, probably not a good read on the land how you might fit elsewhere in the NHL. Is again, if you can't crack the Sharks roster, it's probably not a good sign for you here soon. But I know the Sharks did add some pieces, and with the bottom six, but there's a lot of names down here, right? And especially when you look at some of these Barracuda guys, like I mentioned, right, Cardwell, who played really well at times with the Sharks last year, and is a guy who quickly earned that trust to be a do-it-all type of, like, play on the penalty kill, play on the power play, play on 5-on-5, and quickly earn the trust of the coaching staff. And Zach Ostapchuk, who the Sharks, again, that was kind of the big piece that you got from the Fabian Zetterlund trade. And yes, trying to be patient with Ostapchuk, but like they believe he is a long-term solution for them in their bottom six. And if he plays your center, and then you have Goodrow, and then you have a guy like Dellandrea, who, again, that flexibility of center wing, type of player, right? Like, guys would rather have, GMs and coaches would rather have a guy who can play two positions on a roster than a guy who can only play one position. And Dellandrea is a guy I think who's clearly above Grundstrom in the pecking order right now. So, I feel like, even long term, looking at like where the Sharks are at with some of these pieces here, right? The good thing is, like, nobody other than, like, everybody is contracts other than, I'd say, Goodrow are pretty movable if you had to. Again, you're not probably getting anything back for a guy like Carl Grundstrom or even a Ty Dellandrea, but Goodrow and his cap hit and his 15-team no trade list, like he's on this roster. Unless a team like specifically is looking for Barclay Goodrow, he's on this roster right now. But none of the, like, even a guy like Daniel Gushin, who's an RFA, and we'll see if he even makes it to training camp, unless he might get traded for, as we just saw with Thomas Bordeleau. It does feel like this could be a very wishy-washy, with guys going up and guys coming down, and kind of trying to find the right pieces together on the bottom six as you head into training camp and early into the season. And but yeah, I do think, though, like, Colin Graf got to feel really good about his situation. Carl Grundstrom probably needs to have a big training camp. So that's going to be it for me today. We'll be back tomorrow, probably talking more Askarov. So make sure you guys stick around for that. Follow along wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you can watch on YouTube as well. Follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at My Fry Hole. Till tomorrow. Bye, friends.